Salutation, the name's Cavill. So I've dissected II, I've dissected 1, now it's time for the original, the quintessential, Jackin' Jellyfy. So who's my favorite BFDI character? Depends on the season, but my overall favorite would have to be Gelatin. He's a character who never took the center stage, but has been a complete outlier since day 1, even being the only character to have his own unique voice actor. He had an interesting start as the only Season 2 contestant to ignore the entire voting process, instead being suggested by a friend of the creator. Sure, Golf Ball joined the same way, but at least she was part of the initial voting. Gelatin just kinda came out of nowhere. His joining was less like David and more like Profile-y. Now, who suggested Gelatin? That'd be Degrassi Fan, a YouTube channel dedicated to Total Drama fan videos. Now, I've never watched Total Drama, so I don't have the full context, but most of these seem to be, I guess you could call them comic panels. He basically tried to make his own Total Drama episodes, but without the voice acting or animation, often weaving in clips from the actual show. Now, I wouldn't call these videos good by a long shot, but if you're above the age of 16, I'd honestly recommend giving this channel a look. It is the perfect time capsule of what people did on YouTube back in 2010. Link in description, definitely one of my most unexpected nostalgia trips. Anyhow, what's Gelatin's first action in the series? Well, upon noticing that Team No Name has 2 extra members, he decided to join them. The entire team followed his lead, leaving the game as 3 versus 19, which was utter chaos as you can imagine. This horrible team balance defined the game for a very long time and had ripple effects continuing to this day. So how about that? Gelatin's influence nearly destroyed the season in one fell swoop. Not too shabby. Anyhow, Gelatin spins the contest wheel in episodes 1 through 3. He never does it again afterwards, but doing it in the first 3 episodes in a row couldn't be a coincidence. Also, if you're curious, apparently this is Gelatin's favorite way to watch television. Anyhow, Gelatin rides to Yoyoland on Puffball, throwing 3 teammates overboard just for the sake of space. He's then attacked by Metal Leafy, but don't worry, Gelatin packs acid spitballs for this exact situation. Why? Well, I have theories that I'll detail later. For now, what you need to know is that Leafy dodges, forcing Gelatin to flee. In the next episode, Gelatin does nothing interesting until the epilogue, when he defeats Evil Leafy, not to be confused with Metal Leafy. Actually, he doesn't just defeat him, he scrawls a humiliating message on the guy's back. If you've seen this show, then you know making physical contact with Evil Leafy is something no other contestant is brave enough to do. So how exactly did he defeat Evil Leafy? With a product called Freeze Juice, which does exactly what you'd imagine. Now, the first 2 times Freeze Juice appears in the show, Gelatin is the source, implying that he may have invented it himself. Afterwards, every team seems to have constant access to it, however, so who really knows? In episode 4, half the cast has died of poisoning, while Gelatin has enough anti-venom for only 2 people. It's never explained where he got the anti-venom, but it's not for his own protection because he's the only contestant who's simply immune to the bug's poisoning. However, with the anti-venom, the freeze juice, and the acid spitballs, there's a strong argument to be made that Gelatin has a background in chemistry, specializing in what one might call biological warfare. Gelatin doesn't seem like the type you'd find in a laboratory, but he also doesn't seem like the owner of a steakhouse, as we discover in the next episode. He also doesn't seem like the type to sacrifice himself for someone as worthless as Match, but he does. Perhaps he was repaying Pencil. Anyways, Leafy then decides to visit, which gives Gelatin an opening to finally kill her. Consider the business finished. He then observes as Ruby recovers Flower and immediately freezes her, before speaking to Ruby in a very stern tone. This implies he has a strong understanding of what happened in Season 1, and just how dangerous Flower really is. Moving from the opening to the cake at stake, Gelatin receives the least votes on his whole team. It was 105 though, which was a lot at the time, enough to give him this expression. Then when the actual contest starts, Match uses him as a tree disguise. It's unclear why it goes along with this, maybe he didn't hear about the free smart split. On the road, he yet again throws his teammates overboard, but this time it derails the entire challenge as they're forced to go on a rescue mission. Finally, when Puffball needs protection, her immediate instinct is to recover Gelatin. It's unclear why she'd choose him, as they'd never talked before, and Gelatin is a lot more reckless than Fries or TB. If Gelatin did invent the freeze juice, it's possible that he'd be the only person who immediately has it upon recovery. It seems like a stretch, but I can't think of any other reason for Puffball to do this. Overall, Gelatin is a deceptively important character to BFDIA, but we don't notice him because he operates mostly through implications. You'd expect these chemicals to come from someone with an inventing gimmick like Golf Ball or Yellowface, but instead they go to Gelatin. You'd expect the season-defining split to be kicked off by someone more openly competitive like Puffball or Ruby, but instead they chose Gelatin. He was considered important enough to be given the spotlight almost constantly, and yet they never assigned a gimmick that he could rely on, or a relationship that would lead to drama. Let's see if the pattern continues in the next segment.
No.
In Battle for BFDI, Gelatin is given a running joke of trying to sacrifice Bommy as a way of winning every challenge. In episode 3, he consoles Bommy after he partially explodes, however, making it unclear whether he values him as a person. Then in episode 3, he causes the first 2 deaths on Team Death Pact before being tortured by 4, nearly dying himself. 11 episodes later, that's a lot, he rescues Barfbag but leaves Naily to die. Then in episode 16, he cries about losing a speck of dust, and he also reveals that if he wins the prize, he'll use it to start a beatboxing career. That's it for BFB. It was really underwhelming, but it's not the fault of Gelatin himself, it's a problem with BFB. Confession time, I don't really consider BFB to be a very good show. It's a solid 3 or 4 out of 10. There's a reason I took so long to talk about it, and I don't really have plans to talk about it in the future. The show has some shining moments, but it also has problems that are hard to deny and especially to ignore. One of the biggest would be the cast, because for some reason Jack and Jelfie thought a season with 64 contestants was possible. Like, never mind being good, no one wants to make 64 episodes for one season of an object show, and considering how poorly IDFB went, it's shocking that the creator didn't realize this. I'm sorry if Teapot is secretly great, but I haven't watched it because it's the animation equivalent of an abortion. Jack and Jelfie realized the problem with BFB and fixed it by removing 40 of the contestants with the vague promise they'd give them their own show to compete on. Now, what were the direct effects of adding such an absurd amount of characters? The obvious one was that the character gimmicks experienced a major spotlight problem because the average episode runtime was about 10 minutes. If divided equally, each character had less than 10 seconds per episode to make the audience like them, which was an obvious losing battle. The characters became an incredibly homogeneous blur, with even the legacy characters fading into the background. Suddenly, subtle character gimmicks like Leafy's kindness or Match's selfishness were no longer enough to make a character stand out. Golf Ball became the borderline main character as she had the only gimmick powerful enough to control the plot, hence forcefully take the spotlight. Gelatin, however, became the de facto background character because BFB was such an unfriendly environment for subtle characters like him. Let's see if things go better in the next segment. In Battle for Dream Island, God, that's such a bad name, Gelatin gets back on track as we see that he was once arrested for impersonating Loser. That's an interesting start. In the next episode, we find out that he and Blocky are apparently friends. We know this because Blocky leveraged their friendship in order to execute a prank. This prank ends up revealing that Gelatin really wants to taste outer space. Like, really wants to. Badly enough that he tears open the airlock. This nearly got his entire team killed, and he seemingly paid for it by nearly being eliminated. Leafy then tells him that if he makes a Sun Angel, that displaced magma will cast a massive shadow onto Earth. This is exactly why he makes the Sun Angel. Honestly, going to space really brings the worst out of Gelatin. He has a habit of doing whatever he thinks is cool and hoping the challenge just works out, but outer space isn't nearly as forgiving toward mistakes like those. In episode 21, we learn that he's a cannibal, but more importantly, we learn that he hates when people are kind with ulterior motives. At the same time, we find out that his birthday is July 29th. I'm not sure what this means, the wiki didn't mention it, but I have to assume it's some kind of total drama reference. In the next episode, he was invited to join an alliance with Lollipop. He didn't seem super excited about it, he just didn't have a reason to say no. He did seem excited to talk to Teardrop, however, but when he read her comic, he saw that it was about Gelatin dying violently. This caused a massive rift between him and Teardrop, as he was understandably no longer comfortable around her. In this situation, most of us would either ball up our feelings and pretend not to be bothered, or get angry and make the situation worse. It often feels like those are the only two options. Gelatin, however, seems to have a lot of experience setting boundaries, as he calmly explains to Teardrop what she did wrong and that he needs space from her. In response, Teardrop throws a party in Gelatin's honor, which ends up mending their relationship. This also reveals that Gelatin's ideal party contains cheesecake and musical chairs. Gotta say, he has taste. This grand gesture leads to Teardrop joining the Newbie Alliance, meaning that Gelatin's social circle looks something like this. Anyhow, Flower proceeds to threaten him into wearing her sweaters, which he does with a smile. This implies that Gelatin despises fake kindness, but coercion? That's just fine. In the next episode, he roasts Blocky for trying to start a podcast, and for someone as industrious as Gelatin, it honestly makes sense. Then Gelatin is told to throw a party for 4, but instead he chooses to throw a party for X. He claims that would make 4 happiest, but honestly I just think he hates 4, because in the next episode he assaults it. That's right, Gelatin has the brass balls to go needy on arguably the most powerful character in fiction. With this and confronting evil Leafy, you gotta wonder if he has some kind of death wish. The next episode demonstrates similar traits, as Gelatin explains he's published several astronomy textbooks that are full of lies. He's also apparently skilled at forging documents. Suddenly being a war criminal doesn't seem so far-fetched. He spends the next 2 episodes trying to make Flower the main target of his alliance. Either he remembered their previous interactions or realized that Flower is the biggest threat in the game. This strategy doesn't work, however, because he and Flower pass the final gauntlet and become the final 2. In the process, we discover 2 things. A. Gelatin has prosopagnosia, and B. Gelatin wants to be nicknamed both Speedy Gelatin and Danger Gelatin. Alas, all the nicknames in the world wouldn't be enough, as Flower wins the final vote in a landslide. He takes it well, all things considered. In fact, he reveals that he didn't even know BFB was a competition. This isn't really supported by the series, so maybe it's just a coping strategy, who really knows. Next, the season finale is divided in 2 halves, with some contestants trying to protect the BFDI while others try to protect 4. This all culminates in a speech from Gelatin about how he's mad at 4 for inflicting so much pain on them, but he also appreciates how much fun they had together. Once again, this isn't really supported by the series at large, maybe Gelatin is just a compulsive liar. At the very end, Gelatin feels inspired by Teardrop's comic and captures the epilogue in the same format. In it, he and Flower become business partners, opening a hybrid clothing store plus steakhouse, which sounds like it wouldn't stay open a week. Luckily though, I'm not sure whether this epilogue comic is canon or if it's all just Gelatin's fanfiction. That's where BFB ends, and honestly, Gelatin was the MVP. He rarely went a whole episode without a memorable moment. If I had any criticisms, Gelatin felt a lot less independent than in BFDIA. He can deliver a setup, he can deliver a payoff, but he can't really do both, relying more on people like 4, Lollipop, Flower, and Teardrop. Hopefully, he'll return to his former glory when he returns to BFDIA.
Wait, we already played that, didn't we?
This season starts with Gelatin confessing that he misses Rocky's vomit before being a victim of Needle's sabotage. Gelatin's independence has hit an all-time low. 2 episodes later, however, we have what is probably Gelatin's most in-depth appearance, episode Meaty. This is when we find out that Gelatin's Steakhouse is, for some reason, rebranding to Gelatin's Shade House. Because the challenge was based on coloring, he was actually able to win the episode by giving rose-colored glasses to the announcer. He also accepts coiny as payment for a pair of glasses, implying that he supports trafficking. This video project has made me really want to do a BFDI crime trial type video. The next episode is a charades challenge. Pin must mimic Gelatin, and it looks like this apparently. He gets back at Needle by sabotaging her in return, but it's all for naught because Gelatin himself is awful at charades. This is the episode where Gelatin forgetting that the show is a challenge seems the most legitimate, because he thought he could win by giving a friendship speech towards someone he barely knows. He also can't recognize the symbol for aspirin, which shoots a hole in our chemist theories. That's about where he ends, as he's eliminated for the first time ever in episode 10, where he reveals that for some reason, he really hates the season 1 announcer. Honestly, the series felt like it was kinda done with Gelatin at this point, and I kinda understand why they'd feel that way. Gelatin was a star player for the first half of BFDIA and the second half of BFB, but unlike Flower, he doesn't have any serious character flaws they could milk for drama. The jokes and weird details around Gelatin are great, but over time they would inevitably begin to feel more and more random. Ultimately, the creators knew that after Gelatin made it all the way through BFB, they had to sideline him or he'd begin to feel stale. Maybe he really is a total drama character. It pains me to say this, but honestly, Gelatin shouldn't have been in this segment at all. His presence is the result of Jack and Jelly's commitment issues, not his creative vision. That's a sad way to end this review, so let's do a bonus segment analyzing his personal relationships. Now, Gelatin gives his opinions on a lot of different people, but there's two people which the show comes back to constantly, the first being Fries. It's insinuated by the show and fanbase alike that Fries despises Gelatin, but how accurate is that really? First off, remember how Gelatin spun the wheel the first 3 times? For some reason, Fries was always there too. Their first proper interaction came when Gelatin switched teams and Fries followed suit, demonstrating respect for Gelatin's decision making. 1 episode later, Fries and Gelatin worked together to roast TV's new theme song, and credit to them, criticism can make for great bonding. An episode later, Gelatin eats one of the fries before claiming they're over a year old. IDFB suggests that it happens constantly, but this is the only time it's happened on screen. When Fries is poisoned, Gelatin makes sure to detox him. He could detox a second person, but he doesn't until Nickel requests it. Fries returns the favor when the HPRC is introduced and he rushes to recover Gelatin. Then when Golf Ball murders Fries, Gelatin scolds her before avenging him. About 2 seasons later, X stows away inside Fries, and Gelatin is the only one to notice. And due to Fries joining Teapot, this is their only interaction in the entirety of BFB. In the Charades challenge, Gelatin rushes to rescue Fries, and afterwards they have an interesting conversation. When Fries complains that Gelatin nearly got someone killed, Gelatin begins poking and prodding him that Fries is also technically a murderer, which sparks a fierce debate. Gelatin is just kidding around, while Fries seems a lot more emotionally invested, which makes both of them completely forget the challenge. Overall, Fries and Gelatin remind me of Pim and Charlie. They seem to like each other as people, but Fries takes the competition a lot more seriously than Gelatin does, which leads to a lot of conflict. If the competition wasn't driving a wedge between them, I think they'd become good friends, but in the end I think they're acquaintances at best. Gelatin's other relationship is with Fiery, which is a noticeably slower burn. In episode 5, they tie their legs together out of boredom, which goes poorly, twice in a row. That's their only interaction for BFDIA, and they have no interactions in Battle for BFDI. In Battle for BFB, Bubble and Lollipop disguise as Flower to infiltrate the other team at the tower destroying contest. Fiery immediately recognizes them, but for some reason he doesn't recognize Gelatin in the same disguise. However, Gelatin never actually ends up destroying the tower, instead deciding to play patty cake with Fiery. My guess is that Fiery was in on the scheme and used it as an excuse to ditch the contest with Gelatin. When Leafy and Fiery are having an emotional discussion, Gelatin tries to weigh in and Leafy tells him to shut up. This prompts Fiery to correct her, saying that Gelatin is welcome in all of their discussions, which is a major showcase of friendship, but it kinda had to be, because once again, these are the only 2 interactions they share. Ironically, we don't get a true taste of their friendship until they return to BFDIA, when they do a cheer routine with no rehearsal. Then when Fiery is asked to switch to the Free Smart team and perform sabotage, he demands to take Gelatin with him, and the 2 wreak havoc like never before. Lastly, when Gelatin is eliminated, he's excited to reunite with Fiery, and they tie their legs together like old times. This was definitely the biggest season for their relationship, but that's mostly the result of Jack and Jellyfy losing interest in both characters. I've talked about how Gelatin got watered down, but I think Fiery is an even worse case because the character never had much going on to begin with. He's remembered as the winner of Dream Island and the thief of Donut's Diary, but that's it. I can't think of any other notable moments he was a part of. Being made of fire is an interesting gimmick, but it's not very useful narratively, because if you solved every problem by burning it, the show would get repetitive very fast. Ultimately, this pairing felt like an attempt to breathe life into both characters, which didn't work because I honestly think Fiery and Gelatin just aren't a good duo. They certainly match each other's energy, but they don't exactly feed each other's energy. Any line from Gelatin could easily come from Fiery, which isn't how a comedic duo works. It's the difference between regular show and breadwinners. When they're together, they just feel like 2 idiots. They even had this short where the 2 of them stole the Free Smart van, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I don't think I've ever been more stone face for 3 minutes straight. Gelatin is guilty of becoming very dependent on other characters by this point in the show, and unfortunately, Fiery had nothing to offer him. So much for a happier conclusion.